What's up, Jaywalkers? I'm excited to talk to you guys about this today. I've been reading in the book of Kings and now I'm into Chronicles, and I just wanted to teach you a little bit something about the difference between those two books because for a long time it seemed to me like they were talking about the exact same thing. The book of Kings actually is looking at the history of the kings of Judah and Israel. So it's looking at both of the north and south kingdom. But the book of Chronicles looks more at the history of the kingdom of Judah. So the south only, kind of where King David's line would be traced through. We know that the south kingdom did a better job of following the commandments of the Lord, though over time they did stray just like the northern kingdom did. And eventually they were also carried off into captivity by Babylon instead of by Assyria. So those two books in our Bible are listed like right after each other. It goes Kings and then Chronicles. And sometimes you're like, wait, I just read this. But in the Hebrew Bible, they actually weren't right next to each other. The book of Kings comes earlier, and the book of Chronicles is actually the last book in the Hebrew Bible. So what they were doing was they were given like a recap of everything. And if you start reading the book of Chronicles, it seems like they're given like 1,000 people's names. It's literally like 9 chapters of names. But after that, they start tracking through the books, or the not the books, but the really the histories books that they had, and saying what happened in Israel, tracking that line of King David all the way through. And so it's a really interesting place to look. And sometimes you get more details there than you get in the book of Kings, but you'll also see some overlap because you are talking about the same kings in the same stories, though they don't give all of the same details. So we're going to pick up today in 2 Chronicles chapter 24. This is a little bit after the story that we talked about last week. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to last week's, go ahead and check it out. But if you have, then you're ready to pick up here. And I'm just going to start in 2 Chronicles 24, verse 1. And I'm going to read 1 and 2 and then give you a little bit more storyline. Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. And he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zebiah of Beersheba. And Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. So a couple crazy things there. This kid's 7, and he got crowned king. That's a young person. I don't think they're probably ready to reign an entire kingdom yet. But you heard somebody's name in there in verse 2. It says that Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, not just all the time, but all the days of Jehoiada the priest. So Jehoiada the priest is this really cool character in this story. And he's this guy who had a wife, and he would have been the priest in the temple of God. And his wife saw what was happening when the last king that we were talking about got killed by Jehu. Athaliah, the queen mother, decided she wanted to have the power now. This is Ahab and Jezebel's daughter. And she wants the power now. So she kills all of the sons, all of the relatives of Ahaziah, the king that we talked about last time. And he ends up, Jehoiada's wife ends up taking Joash when he was just a little kid and safely sneaking him away to the temple. And Jehoiada, the priest, and his wife raise him like it's their kid. And so I don't know how many of you have like a stepfather or like a person who acts like your dad but maybe isn't your biological father. That's kind of what Jehoiada's role was here. And he did a great job at that role. And he would have taught Joash these things that he needed to learn. He would have been kind of like a father to him, even as the woman who saved him, his wife, would have been like a mother to him. And then when he was 7, they decided, okay, it's time. We have to do something. This lady's not ruling right. She's all about herself. She's just power hungry. She's doing the wrong things. Israel's being led astray. Judah is already doing the wrong things. It's not a good thing. So we're gonna help out. We're gonna establish Joash as king. He's the rightful king anyway. So they do that, and they start following the things that God says. And Joash probably isn't old enough to rule and reign on his own. He's going to need somebody like beside him. And so he has Jehoiada there. And for all the days of Jehoiada, Joash does what's right in the eyes of the Lord. They end up getting the temple kind of set back up. They end up, making some changes, getting rid of some of the things that they're worshiping that are bad things, and things are going well. I'd ask you to look for that person in your life. Who is that person? They're not God. They're not going to be the one who is taking the place of God or anything like that, but they're a counselor to you. They're somebody that you can look to and you can trust. And if you don't have that person in your life, then you're going to want to look for a person like that. Or you're going to want to zoom into people like that in the Bible that teach certain things and make them your mentor, because we can learn just as much from those stories as we can from real life stories ourselves. These people don't become our idols, but they can be our counselors, and they can talk to us and speak truth to us. They better be telling you what the word of God says. That's one of the things that Jehoiada did as a priest and as a father figure to Joash. But verse 15 comes, and this is what it says next. But Jehoiada grew old and full of days and died. He was 130 years old at his death. And they buried him in the city of David among the kings, because he had done good in Israel and toward God and his house. So this guy lived to be 130. I don't know how old he was when he started kind of caretaking for Joash, but was probably pretty old, probably like 90s or 100 or something even then. And so when he died, the people recognized that he was an awesome guy, that probably a bunch of what was happening was because of this guy. And they buried him among the kings. I don't know how often that happened, but it couldn't have been too often, because you don't hear about that very much. But they respected this man so much. The things that he'd done, the way that he'd raised this young man to be king, the way that this young king was governing, that they buried him among the kings. Honor, respect, man, that's a big deal. Verse 17 says, Now after the death of Jehoiada, the princes of Judah came and paid homage to the king. Then the king listened to them. That's really interesting to me. See, what's happening is Jehoiada is gone. And now these princes, they wouldn't have been like king's sons. They would have been like the leaders of houses, like of clans, like powerful people. Kind of like family leaders, things like that. People who had some prestige in the land of Judah. And they came to the king, and it says they started to pay him homage. See, before this, they'd been paying homage to the temple. They'd been paying homage to God. And now something like, it's like a subtle shift, but it's a shift. They're still paying homage, but they shift, and now they're paying homage to the king. So I can see them coming up and being like, man, I'm gonna hook the king up. I'm gonna do this because I'm gonna get the king's ear. And it says right after that, then the king listened to them. So it worked. This money, this prestige. He didn't have the guy who was there talking to him anymore saying, this is probably not a good thing. They should be paying this homage. They should be giving this tribute to God and not to you. And he probably liked it a little bit. Joash was probably ready to get out from under Jehoiada's little protection, his little wings, right? But he might not have been ready to do it like this. And so he was quick to decide that he was going to listen to these people that probably didn't have his best interests in mind. They probably had their own best interests in mind. And so it says, they abandoned the house of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and served the Asherim and the idols. Oh, not again. So I looked up this Asherim thing because you hear about them a lot. You read about these Asherah poles and how people are worshiping these Asherim. And I was like, what is that? What are these things? These things are a tribute to the goddess Asherah. And there's kind of a lot of mystery behind this goddess Asherah, but basically she would be like a seductive person. She would be like, all of the little poles would have been shaped like a woman. They accentuated like the womanly features. She would have been over things like fertility and over things like protection. And in some scholarly reports, they even believe that people thought of her kind of like you might call Mother Earth today. But also even more, they thought of her kind of like God's wife, which I thought was a little bit weird and I had never really read or heard before. But thinking of her as God's wife is kind of placing her at this like godly status, whereas she didn't really deserve that godly status. And these people, these nations around, the Hittites, the Canaanites, some of the people that would have been there from before, they worshiped other gods. And Israel kind of always wanted to fall back into that a little bit. And so they were being influenced by these other places. And so when they start worshiping these Asherim poles or this goddess Asherah, what they're actually doing is they're giving in again to the world. They're saying, I'm going to allow this sensuality in. I like the look of that goddess, man. She's got a good shape. And so they start looking to these things. And we might think like we don't worship those things. I don't worship any Asherah poles or I don't have anything like that. But the truth is, man, when you pick certain things to watch or to look at, you're sort of worshiping an Asherah pole. When you like stuff on Instagram or on TikTok, you put the little hearts on there. Like, if that thing is being seductive, if that thing is showing off how they look, it's sort of the same thing as an Asherah pole would have been back in the day. And so I just want to put that out there because I want you to be aware of that. Because sometimes we think that this was just things that people back then did. And it's not stuff that we have issues with today. But Jehoiada was the guy who was keeping Joash on track. And now that he's gone, Joash wants to see what his eyes can take in. He wants to see how much people respect and look to him. He wants them to be on his team. And he's listening to these people that don't necessarily have his best interest in mind. He's listening to the world. And it's getting in and it's creeping in and it's starting to infiltrate his life. And I want you to see what happens because of that. It says next in verse 19, yet he sent prophets among them to bring them back to the Lord. These testified against them, but they would not pay attention. There were people coming to them and telling them like, I think you guys are getting a little bit off track. And they wouldn't listen. Nah, I got this. I'm good. I can look at what I want to look at. I'll be okay. I trust God. I love him. All that. Yeah. Verse 20. Then the Spirit of God clothed Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest, and he stood above the people and said to them, thus says God, why do you break the commandments of the Lord so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you. Ooh, man, sometimes we feel like God leaves us. Don't we? We feel like he's like abandoned us, but usually it's not that. Like I'd say it's never that because God doesn't leave us or forsake us. But a lot of times what we'll do is we'll disobey God, the things that he says, and then it'll feel like God's further from us, but God's not going to let us prosper when we're doing things that are the wrong things. He's going to remove his protection. He's going to remove his blessing sometimes, and it's going to feel like he's abandoned us, but really we're the ones who forsook him. And because we've forsaken him, he let us kind of do our own thing, realizing that what that's going to do is it's going to show us that, man, this isn't as good as I thought it was and bring us back. His goal is never to hurt us. It's always to have relationship with us. And when we put that barrier between us and him by not following what he says, then he's got to do something to get our attention back. And so in this case, he sent Zechariah. Zechariah, you notice, was Jehoiada's son, his real son. Joash, remember, was like a son to Jehoiada. So this makes this man, Zechariah, like a brother to Joash. I imagine them like growing up together. He might be a little bit older, but they would have been like brothers. So what happens next is even more crazy and appalling knowing that. But they conspired against him. And by command of the king, they stoned him with stones in the court of the house of the Lord. Wow. He just killed a guy who was like his brother. The king commanded it. He said, do it. And they didn't even like take him too far from where he was. They did that in the court of the house of the Lord. Like, this is not a good thing. It says, thus Joash the king did not remember the kindness that Jehoiada, Zechariah's father, had shown him, but killed his son. And when he was dying, he said, may the Lord see and avenge. And the Lord did see, and the Lord did avenge. And I'll just finish up the story by letting you see that. At the end of the year, the army of the Syrians came up against Joash. They came to Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed all the princes of the people from among the people and sent all their spoil to the king of Damascus. Oh, that sounds like the same people who were trying to get Joash's ear by paying him homage. Now they're getting destroyed by the Syrians. Though the army of the Syrians had come with few men, the Lord delivered into their hand a very great army, because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. Thus they executed judgment on Joash. Man, you read over and over again, even in the book of Kings and in the book of Chronicles, how these giant armies came against Judah, came against Israel, and God took small armies and defeated them because they were putting their trust in him. But now kind of the opposite's happened. They stopped putting their trust in him. So a small army comes and this small army defeats them. Sometimes we wonder, how can things that shouldn't be a big deal in my life, how are they defeating me? How do I feel like I can't fight back against this? Why am I losing? I should be stronger than this. And the reason often is because we've done what Joash has done. We've kind of turned our back on the things that God's called us to do. And we're doing our own thing, and we're listening to our friends, and we're listening to these people who don't have our best interests in mind. And when we do that, we are risking losing the protection of God and losing the blessing of God. So if you're feeling like you're not blessed, if you're feeling like you're kind of out on a limb by yourself, it's not God. It's probably you. Verse 25, when they departed from him, leaving him severely wounded, his servants conspired against him because of the blood of the son of Jehoiada the priest, and killed him on his bed. So he died, and they buried him in the city of David, but they did not bury him in the tomb of the kings. Wow. Like, see how that ends. He gets wounded. People who are supposed to be like his servants, his people that are on his team, they kill him. They conspired against him because of what they saw him do to the son of Jehoiada, to Zechariah. And so they killed him. And when he died, they took him to the city of David to bury him, but they didn't bury him in the tomb of the kings. Remember, they buried Jehoiada in the tomb of the kings, even though he was never king. I think that what's happening here is we're seeing that this man, Joash, was a great king, but it was because of the guy that was behind him, because of Jehoiada and his following God. And what I want to warn you of, and I want to ask you about, is, are you following God because of someone else? Are you following God because of your parents? Are you following God because of some mentor in your life that follows God? Or are you following him because you want to follow him? Because see, Joash was following him because of somebody else. And as soon as he got a chance, he did his own thing and made sure he prospered. And he turned his back on God and all the things that he'd done for him. So that's my question to you. Take a good hard look at your life and see if you're following him. Because if you're following him for somebody else, when that somebody else leaves, you better be very careful about what you do next. It's a dangerous thing to fall into the hands of God. And God will leave you to teach you a lesson. And if you don't come back to him then, man, that lesson could be the end of you. And I don't want to see people lose everything that God's built up, everything that he's done for them in their life because of somebody else when they get the chance to make their choice. Is he your God or is he someone else's? If he's your God, then man, you better be talking to him. You better be reading what his word says. You better decide that you're going to follow him. You can decide that today. You just ask him. You say, God, I want to follow you. I believe that Jesus did what he said he was going to do. I believe he came and he died for me, and I want to live for him. And if you pray that simple prayer and you ask God, he'll send you his spirit to lead you and guide you and direct you. He's not hiding himself from you. You're not listening to what he said. You're being stubborn, just like Joash. So I want to encourage you to dive into the word of God, to see what he says, and to listen when you hear his voice. Jaywalkers, I love you. I hope to see you on Wednesday night for our next Zoom call. Man, we had 83 people from like all over the world this past week. It was the coolest thing ever. And I just can't wait for the next one. We love you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.